In honor of the 1 year anniversary to when I started uploading, which happened 2 months ago, so I guess I'll say in honor of New Year's, I thought it would be interesting to revisit old ideas to show how they've changed over the last year. So the idea I'm going to revisit today is the Mountaintop PondShrine and the holiday that goes on in its temple. The purpose is not to remake the old video, the purpose is to be a follow-up to show off the world building process, meaning how the idea has changed since its first conception. I do want to, and I do plan to make videos on new topics too, but I just thought this was an interesting idea to pursue, a kind of record of how the idea started and how it's changed. You know, who knows, maybe I'll come back to it again next year too, or maybe a different one. To be honest, the celebration ritual concept has evolved the most in the last year, but there's still lots of holes in the new stuff I added to it, so it would be more difficult to present. So that's why I'm doing the PondShrine one now. In any case, I think to get the full experience on this, consider having the first PondShrine video fresh in memory. This whole thing started off from me taking a hike and walking past a calm pond on the top of a mountain. The only idea I had then was that it should be some type of holy site. That was the kernel. And from this kernel I came up with a whole thing that I shared in the original PondShrine video, and now let's revisit said whole thing and see what's changed. The main idea of the PondShrine itself is pretty much the same. Any pools, ponds on the top of mountains, hills that just sit there without any inflow or outflow are automatically holy objects. You can't touch or otherwise interact with the water or the land in its immediate vicinity in any way. Now, if you so choose, you can set up a shrine around it to please and worship the beauty deity. These shrines are said to bring beauty into the world and specifically the country that it's in. And so once you do put up a shrine, now you have to take care of it, and you can't just change your mind and back out anymore, because to let a beauty shrine of all shrines get abandoned would be an extreme negative, because abandonment is the opposite of beauty. The shrines are simple horseshoe or pie-shaped structures that enclose the pond and a garden of beautiful plants that you set up around said pond for added beauty. These structures are nothing more than open-air wooden walkways on stilts with a roof over it, and the poles holding up the roof are usually the parts that have the most detail and design, being decorated with various beauty-related themes. Now, these shrines require work. They need to have priests that take care of them and who live on-site, by which I mean pretty close by, and they would live there with their families too. Four Crows had the awesome idea that you also need to set up a bird bath in the garden, the purpose of which is for the priests to take its water after the birds have eaten from the trees and bathed in it, and pour it into the pond to keep it from drying out. This is because the birds, which are beautiful creatures, holify the water into a state that allows it to be added into the ponds, which are for the beauty deity. In fact, only water from the bird baths are holy enough to be poured into these ponds. You also need to plant a particular tree on the bank of the pond, and this tree will be just as holy as the water it grows next to, meaning you can't touch this tree or anything produced by it. The tree that you need to plant is one specific species that has long leaves whose purpose is to overhang above the pond in a way that it covers the pond fully and directly from up high, meaning there's nothing between the leaves and the pond. This tree keeps growing new leaves and shedding old leaves, and so whenever a leaf falls into the pond, because you can't touch the pool directly, you have to have a net on a stick ready-made from leaves and branches from another member of the same tree species, which has to grow in the garden there, and you use that to scoop out the fallen leaf from the pond. These fallen leaves are then put in a safe location and they're stored for a while until they get used, which I'll get back to later. A wandering traveler can pay pilgrimage to one such mountaintop PondShrine if they so choose, but because the PondShrine is so holy, they would first have to go to the priest's house that's close by, and they would have to stay there for a while and slowly get holified through different procedures and rituals like ritual baths and stuff, and only then would they be holy enough to be able to visit and pay pilgrimage to the actual PondShrine. So that pretty much covers the PondShrine, and you can see most of it is the exact same as last time, except there's some more detail to it now. Now, I had said in the last video that there should be temples around the shrines, but now I'm going to get into some actual detail about these temples. Firstly, they don't have to be built. A shrine on its own works just as well, but you can go one level further than building a shrine and build a temple complex around one. These temples would be sponsored into existence by cities. Not every city needs to sponsor one, but if you're a wealthy city and you want to show off your wealth, or if you want to be considered prestigious, then you would sponsor such a temple to be built. If you're a poor city, you can co-sponsor one such temple with another poor city, and if you're a really poor city, or if you're located too far away from such a shrine, then your luck's out and you'll just have to be without one. Now, these temples would all look different because each one would have to be built on its own mountaintop, following its unique terrain, but the basic gist of it is that connected to the outside of the base of the pie-shaped walkway, there would be a giant hall for a sizable congregation, and behind that hall there would be a few other buildings only connected through open-air walkways like what the shrine is made out of. And again, the exact arrangement of these buildings doesn't really matter. On the outside of the legs of the pie-shaped walkway, there would be a few rooms for people to be able to stay in. I'll get into the exact purpose for all these rooms and buildings, and what sort of people stay in these rooms in a second, but first, I need to discuss something entirely unrelated. Every city has a temple in it, which serves to worship the top, 8 gods. The number and identity of the gods that are worshipped in them is exact and firmly established in-world. I, the world builder, just haven't finalized it yet. But anyway, the point is that when a woman gives birth, she and the baby have to live in that temple for a full month's length to make sure no evil spirits harm them. There are special rooms in the temple set aside for this, and in these rooms she's treated like a queen, with lavish food and servants bringing them things and massaging them and stuff. And in poorer areas, the extent of the services might just be giving the mother a nice cushion to sit on or something. But in that time that she stays there, no one can look directly at her, so the servants wear veils and bow when they interact with her. The servants also take care of the baby so that the mother doesn't have to wake up every 2 minutes during the night to take care of it. The mother is allowed to see and play with the baby, but doesn't do anything like diaper changes during that time. Now every month there is a certain fixed time, let's just say the 15th of the month for the sake of having a number, I just haven't decided on this yet, where all the women who live in cities that sponsor these PondShrineTemples and who gave birth that month leave the main temple and go to the Mountaintop PondShrineTemple of their city with their immediate families, where they all go through like a 6 or 7 day ritual together. Again, it's a specific number, I just haven't decided on this yet, where each day they have another set of things they have to do, and then at the end of the 6 day period, they go back to the city. And the PondShrineTemples host this pilgrimage once a month, so if somebody gives birth right after that 6 day period is over, then they spend the entire beginning of their month's length that they have to spend in the temple, and then the last 6 days of their month's length they spend in the Mountaintop PondShrineTemple. And if you give birth right before the 6 day period, then you spend the first 6 days of your month's length in the Mountaintop PondShrineTemple, and the rest of your month's length you spend in the temple in the city. If you give birth like right between 2 of these 6 day periods, then you spend the first half of your month's length in the city temple, then you spend 6 days at the PondShrineTemple, and then the second half of your month's length back in the city temple. The point is you spend a full month's length in the temple, and 6 days out of those days you spend in the Mountaintop PondShrineTemple with a bunch of other families, and you all do all the PondShrineTemple rituals at the same time. But if your city doesn't sponsor such a Mountaintop PondShrineTemple, then you just spend an entire month's length after giving birth in the main city temple. But for those families that do get to go to a Mountaintop PondShrineTemple, they get to make friends during this time, because all the mothers from that month and all the families of the mothers all come up, so they all get to interact and form bonds. The PondShrine is about beauty, right? And birth and family and forming friendships is the truest beauty. Now I said that they all partake in rituals together, but they actually split up into 2 groups. The mothers themselves and the families of the mothers. And these 2 groups individually do everything together. The mothers go to the rooms on the 2 legs of the pie-shaped walkway, where they will be taken care of by the priests in the presence of the PondShrine for the duration of their stay. The mothers stay right at the shrine because they're already on a very holy level at that point because they just gave birth, but the family members aren't at that level yet, so they first come into the attached temple complex, and over the next 6 days they slowly get holyified more and more until the last day when they get to visit the PondShrine directly. Now what does that look like exactly? I don't really know all the details unfortunately, but here are some ideas. The basic outline is that each building of the temple complex is designed for a different activity to be done in it, and each day they do a different specific activity in another building, starting from the furthest building from the shrine and ending at the main hall that's attached to the base of the pie-shaped walkway. At the end of each day, they go to said main hall where they eat and dance, and then they all sleep together in a big room or a big tent or something like that. As for the daily rituals themselves, one idea I had was that on one of the days they drink beer until they all pass out, and on another day, the leaves that fall into the pond, which are stored somewhere, right, if you remember, they're taken out, those leaves are taken out and they're burned, and they have hallucinogenic or high-making properties, so they all get super high off of it. The idea of these 2 days is to feel like you're getting really close to the divine. And since I'm on the topic now, for shrines without temples around them, they burn the leaves once a month on the same day to when they're burned for the families at the PondShrineTemples, though since they don't get any visiting families, they burn it only for the priests there. And then if they have extra leaves, they can also bring it over to the main city temples to be used for various rituals and sacrifices there too. As an aside, this makes me start thinking if maybe this culture has beauty and alcohol as connected concepts. Like maybe their deities are blood related or something. But anyway, back to the main thing. Another idea I had for the holyifying daily rituals at the PondShrineTemples for the families was that maybe each day they take a bath in a different perfume bath, or they at least cover themselves somehow with perfumes, and then there might be some type of like cream or lotion that cleans off all the scents they put on themselves, so each day they can start fresh again. And the idea is that you're covering yourself with beauty and nice smelling things, which is thematic because it is the beauty deity after all. Some people do something a bit different though, where each day they slowly apply perfume to more of their body, so it's like it builds up the beauty over time until they reach the maximum beauty on the last day of their stay. And this is a nice segue into the peak activity of their stay, which is at the end of this last day, when they're finally fully holy, they all walk together in a line out of a door from the main hall on one corner of the base of the pie-shaped walkway onto the shrine itself, and they walk past the pond and the tree and the bird bath, and they pay respects when they stand right across the pond by doing something like a bow or something ritualistic, and then they walk right back out into the main hall through another door at the other corner. Through their whole stay at this PondShrine temple, they were forbidden from seeing the shrine itself until this single point, so that it feels more special, and everyone has to be completely naked during this walk, so that there's nothing in between them and the holy pond. It should be total contact with the divine. Then, once you finish that, then they have the final night, which is a whole party. First they eat the last dinner of their stay there, which is a party with lots of drinking, and then they all go to sleep in the main hall there instead of the building where they were sleeping till now. The purpose is to specifically sleep in a way that isn't regular. They just move the tables out of the way, and instead of normal beds, they set up makeshift beds, and there aren't enough for everybody, so some people end up having to sleep on chairs or tables. Now, I was thinking that maybe another big theme of this pilgrimage is charity and giving presents and money, because even homeless people are invited to the PondShrineTemples when they give birth, and everyone has to be beautiful. So maybe part of the ritual activities the families partake in this temple is to be given money and presents to make sure everyone has enough to beautify themselves with, even all year round. And it makes sense that the idea of charity is in and of itself considered beautiful, so it would be celebrated at these beauty temples, right? So one way this manifests, I'm thinking, is that at this final night, when everyone sleeps in unconventional ways, they play a game where they pick somebody, and it becomes a game to keep them awake all night by both giving them and asking from them money non-stop. It's mostly kids doing all the harassing and keeping awake because it's a fun game for them. For example, the kids can keep putting money, like coins or whatever type of currency, up the victim's pants, which would keep waking them up because it tickles and because it shakes up the pants a bit too even when it doesn't tickle. And they can also come over to the victim and just plainly ask for some money, or for change from a bigger currency unit too. In fact, there's a game to ask for change of a currency unit that doesn't even exist, like for example of a $200 bill, for a tangible example, because I can imagine if you keep someone up long enough, and especially if they drank a lot beforehand, they might not be able to realize they're getting scammed. They may actually give the change. So the kids might even have a competition who can fool and cheat the victim the most, you know? Now, all that harassment having been said, the victims can keep all the money that's left over on their person at the end. And generally, they do leave over a lot of money in the end, because some will be fake money, but a lot will be real, and so many people actually want to be picked out as the harassee, as the victim. Now, besides for this one fun night for the kids also get to enjoy themselves throughout their stay through special entertaining activities. Some of the priests are there specifically as babysitters, like people that know how to play around with kids, and there are also different plays performed for the kids every single day. So it's a lot of fun for them. Now, as for special foods they eat at the PondShrine Temple, I only have one idea as of now, and that's that it's traditional to eat food based on eggs and seeds, because 1, eggs and seeds are symbols of birth in general, because it's literally where a baby bird and tree comes out of, but 2, the Mountaintop PondShrine has birds and trees as 2 of their symbols, so it makes sense that they'd be big on eggs and seeds there. I'm sure there would be other traditional foods for this holiday thing, at least something that's more of an actual meal, but I don't have anything like that yet. Now, meanwhile the families are having all this fun, the mothers have a much more relaxing, or boring, stay, depending on your perspective. They just stay in their fancy little rooms and get bathed and massaged and brought food and incense and alcohol, but they don't really do anything special. They do get to hang out with the other mothers, and they do get to stare into the garden a lot, so it's really peaceful for some, but I'm sure others would get really annoyed that they can't spend time with their families. That being said, it's an experience, and whenever anyone else in their family gives birth, they get to do all the other stuff then, so it's not like they miss out their one shot at doing those rituals, you know? It's just that they have now like a different set of experiences that no one else can experience. So some people like it, some people don't like it, I'm sure. So yeah, that's the idea. Each day, the people do something else, another special task, that makes them more and more holy, and it's about beauty, family, friends, charity, fun, and enjoying life. I think the main thing I changed from last time was that originally the whole city went up at the same time once a year, and now it's just families going whenever they have a new birth. And I think this new idea fits much better because beauty and birth fit together pretty nicely. Another thing I changed is that last time I said this holiday was for children, but now it's turned into being about children. It's a celebration of birth and the beauty of it, and that we want the baby to grow up beautiful and peaceful, which I guess is close enough. And I did still keep this that the children get to enjoy themselves a lot, especially with the plays and the last night's shenanigans. Speaking of what I said last time, I still like the idea that anyone who's in the military isn't welcome at the Mountaintop PondShrine. So basically, all the family members of each mother comes up, but if a family member is a soldier, then they don't come up anymore. They're not allowed to. Now, I could make up a reason for this. Maybe something like soldiers aren't allowed to drink alcohol or get high, and that's why they're not allowed to come. And in fact, I actually like this idea, that soldiers aren't allowed to drink alcohol or get high. And I think I'm going to keep it. But I still think that it's more fun if the reason why the soldiers can't visit the pond shrines is just some quirk of historical shenanigans of the way that this whole thing evolved in the first place, that became lost to time. So even if I do keep that soldiers aren't allowed to drink alcohol or get high, that's not the reason why they're not allowed to come up. It's an unknown, like a mystery. I think that would be cooler. What's interesting is that the original reason I thought of saying military members can't come to this PondShrine temple was because originally the whole city would come up to the PondShrine temple at once, and it doesn't make sense for them to leave their city unprotected. But even though this reason doesn't work anymore now, this concept that soldiers can't come can still work, and I do like it. So it's interesting how sometimes in the process of fleshing out an idea, we come up with another idea that we like that sticks with us even when the original idea that caused that liked idea gets thrown out. But this is why I'm sharing this. It's cool to see how ideas start off and how they stick around or change over the course of the idea that it's in, evolving around it. It's one of the things I appreciate about worldbuilding. Another idea I still like from last time is that cities need to sponsor a PondShrine temple to allow them to do certain activities in their main city temples that involve beauty, beautification, and feelings of like calmness. Like for example, putting up nice decorations. So that's still how that works. Now for one of my favorite parts of worldbuilding. I want to share an idea I had about the history of this holiday through time. Long ago, there was this belief that bad spirits would come to your house once a year to create some trouble and chaos for the next year. And so a custom started where people would move out of their house temporarily on the days around that date that they believed the bad spirits would come, so that when the bad spirits do come, they would just come across an empty house, and so think, oh, I guess they don't live here anymore, and so leave without causing trouble. But then this turned out not to be enough for the people, so they started taking it a level further and started purposefully doing things in non-normal ways during those days to confuse the bad spirits even more, so that even if they don't fall for the empty house trick, they would see the people acting weird and think, oh, I guess this isn't the family that I need to cause trouble to, I guess they're somewhere else, and so leave them alone. They would do this every year when the spirits come to check up on you to implant chaos for the next year. Then over time it morphed from being a thing to confuse the general bad spirits to being a thing to confuse the spirit that comes to harm newborns and their mothers. And with that, they only started leaving their house only after a birth, and not anymore every year on the same date. Then, since they were leaving their home for a birthing, they were like, we might as well chill at the Mountaintop beauty shrine and celebrate the beauty of birth while we're anyway out from home. From there, the idea of the vacation being to confuse the harmful spirits kind of started getting lost, but you can still see that many of the rituals still reflect this holiday's origins. The most apparent one is the whole sleeping situation and weird harassment game they have on the last night. Looking at it from the holiday's original purpose, it makes sense they'd sleep in unconventional ways and have a game to keep someone up the whole night. It would confuse any spirit. And this unconventional sleeping is probably one of the oldest customs of this holiday that stayed over to the present, with the least changes. And thinking about other rituals I went over, getting drunk and high and covering yourself with perfumes can also tie in with confusing spirits. Like, getting drunk and high makes you act differently, making it so that the spirits wouldn't recognize you. And covering yourself with perfumes makes you smell differently, and it masks who you really are. Now, I don't know if these rituals also go all the way back to when this was just about confusing spirits, but I'm saying I could see at least parts of it being holdovers from way back then. Whatever the case, all these rituals that do trace some of their aspects far back in time have since taken on a new meaning and its own life and are now seen as celebrations of beauty and childhood, even though it originally wasn't for that at all. A cool thing to think about is that maybe the deities of birth and beauty are on their way to merging in the next few centuries, and if this originally came from confusing bad spirits, it would be interesting if this new merged deity will continue to have some antagonistic relationship with bad spirits somehow. Wow. This was a lot longer than I thought it would be. I hope it was as interesting to you as it was to me, to see how this idea grew so much from its tiny beginnings of a simple pond on a mountaintop. And I think that's all I wanted to talk about here, so until next time, just drink jolly juices joyfully.